Arsenal have just been eliminated in the Europa League by Sporting on penalties. 3-3 on aggregate, obviously losing on penalties 5-3. What an unbelievable tie. That's what I'll say. First of all, I just want to give credit to both of these teams because over the course of these two legs, really, really good football played by both sides. Honestly, really fun to watch, a really enjoyable tie. And, I guess I'll go ahead and start with Arsenal because that's basically, where I think we should start. And I'm not going to sit up here and act like they played bad over the course of two legs. They were probably the better side in Portugal. They played very well, went 2-2. And here it took an absolute wonder goal by Sporting, scoring from, what was it, 40-something yards, catching Ramsdale off his line to get a goal. So what I'll say, Arsenal, they played well. They're still a good team. And it is going to be fun to laugh at them because ultimately Arsenal still have 0 European trophies, no Champions Leagues, no Europa Leagues, and that wait is going to continue. So obviously it's funny, of course, but it's one of those things. I'm not worried about Arsenal. They're still going to be the team that we know that they are. They're still a good side. Ultimately, this doesn't really change much for me for them, but it is funny, of course, to laugh at them and meme them for not having won any European trophies still to this day, including Europa League. And they could have done it this season. It's one of those things, but ultimately, if you ask any Arsenal fan or you ask Arteta or any of those players, would they rather win Europa League or the Premier League? Everyone is picking the Premier League, of course. So ultimately, now they can kind of fully set their sights on the Premier League. And that's one thing. I don't know if Arsenal fans want to necessarily hear this after a loss to Sporting in the Europa League, but this might be a blessing in disguise because now they can truly focus on the Premier League. No fixture congestion, no having to worry about that. They can really just set their sights on completing the deal in winning the Premier League because they are 5 points clear of Man City with, I think, 11 games to go, I believe. So now they can really just hone in on winning the Premier League because ultimately that's their goal. I mean, to be top of the Premier League right now, that's ultimately what you want to be winning, especially when you're 5 points clear of Manchester City. You look at the Premier League and you say, there's 11 games to go. We're 5 points clear. This is what we want to win. And if we have to sacrifice the Europa League to win the Premier League, you're taking that trade-off all day long. So Arsenal are still a good team. I'm not going to, as a Chelsea fan, I'm still not going to sit up here and laugh at Arsenal, meme them, banter them. They're still a good side, and it's not like they played bad. If they played bad over the course of these two legs and they got smashed, then maybe that, you can have some fun. You can poke some fun at them. But they lost on penalties. Sporting played well. And it's one of those things. I've been talking about Arsenal, but I want to go ahead and give Sporting some credit because in the same way I say Arsenal have played very well over the course of those two legs, Sporting played excellent football. I was very impressed by Sporting. And this is something maybe I shouldn't have been so surprised about because they did play well against Tottenham, who are a good Premier League side. Obviously, they are a banter club, of course, but that's still a top potential top 6 club in the Premier League. So maybe I shouldn't be so surprised by this, but it's one of those things. Sporting played very well. And I thought after I saw in Portugal, it was 2-2. I said, okay, Arsenal are probably going to come back to the Emirates and they're going to take care of business quite comfortably. But I was very impressed with what I saw from Sporting today because they came into a hostile environment, obviously, at the Emirates, and they were able to play really good football in the same way that they were able to play at home. And ultimately, you can't sit there and say Sporting didn't deserve this. I don't think you could say, I don't think Arsenal didn't deserve it per se, but I think this was a real 50-50 match. It could have went either way. Ultimately, Sporting took it. And take nothing away from Sporting, they played absolutely great football. I was very impressed by them. And obviously, I mean, to score the goal that they did, absolutely incredible. But defensively solid. And to do what they were able to do in the second leg without Coates, who was suspended, that is impressive. And obviously, the Morita also suspended. So 2 key players for them suspended from the first leg. And I also thought that was going to hurt Sporting. But ultimately, they were able to still take care of business. And it's one of those things. Before I get into where I think this takes Arsenal from here, obviously looking at the rest of the Europa League, I would say the 2 favorites in this competition now have to surely be Juventus and Manchester United. And depending on how the draw goes, that might be our potential final. Obviously, the draw might work out to where those 2 teams play each other before then. But if it doesn't, I think those 2 teams could be on a crash course for the final. And that would be a very good Europa League final, I might add. But overall, for Arsenal, this, honestly, I think it's a blessing in disguise. I think it's one of those things. You want to win the Premier League. So if you have to sacrifice the Europa League, I think that this is something. Arteta obviously is going to be disappointed, but it's one of those things. I don't think he's going to be that disappointed because I believe this Arsenal team can go on and win the Premier League. And it's just one of those things. The only thing that worries me potentially is how this loss might affect their confidence because it's one of those things. Although this season, every time I think this adversity might be the thing that stops Arsenal and maybe potentially has them go on a little bit of a losing streak, every time they faced adversity, Arsenal have always rebounded well. So I have no reason to believe that won't happen this time. But of course, this is big adversity, losing in the Europa League. This could affect them ultimately in the long term. And also, what might affect them more so is, along with the adversity, potentially Saliba and Tomiyasu both went off injured early on in this match. And ultimately they get a little bit fortunate because even if these are big injuries, they have the international break coming up. They play Crystal Palace and then the international break comes up. So it's kind of, if you're going to have an injury right now, is probably when you want to have it, I guess. You never want to have an injury, but if you can have it right before the international break, give them time to recover as much as possible. That's what you want. And, not to knock on wood here, I don't want to be that guy, but it looks to me like these were both a little bit precautionary. They were playing they were trying to be on the side of caution here and not risk anything with Tomiyasu or Saliba. So they probably, if it was a big match in the Premier League, they probably would have stayed on, both of them, I would say. But it's one of those things. Do you want to be on the side of caution? And that kind of goes to show maybe where they value this, because they were taking those two off very early. And Saliba, it looked very, very precautionary. You don't want to lose him for the long term. So ultimately, I think it kind of shows they are obviously more focused on the Premier League, and the Europa League was just, if they could win it while still maintaining their lead in the Premier League, they would be happy, of course. But if they have to choose between one or the other, of course, they're choosing the Premier League. And if I had to give my take on this, I don't think this is going to hurt Arsenal in the long term. It is funny, of course, but I don't think that Arsenal are going to have a blip of form now. I expect them to go to Crystal Palace and take care of business like they've been doing all season. Crystal Palace have been pretty poor this entire season, especially recently. So it would surprise me if Arsenal did go to Crystal Palace and then lose, or even draw. I think they take care of business, go into the international break, probably still 5 points clear. And ultimately, like I've said in our last Arsenal video, it kind of comes down to that three game spread for them, where they have Chelsea, Manchester City, and Newcastle. They take care of business in those games. I think they win the Premier League. It just comes down to those games, and they have to be consistent up until then. And that includes beating Crystal Palace, beating a Liverpool. They can do that. I think they still are on course to win the Premier League. It's one of those things. Arsenal would have loved to have won a European competition. They would have loved to have won the Europa League, I'm sure. But I don't think this is a big deal for them. This, honestly, in my opinion, blessing in disguise. So if I'm looking player by player at any players that particularly, disappointed me today, realistically, not really too much, but I will say the guy who potentially is the reason why they'd have lost this in general is Ramsdale. And it's one of those things. I understand Ramsdale has been the number one keeper all season, but Turner has been kind of the guy in the Europa League. I think you should have given Turner the opportunity. I do think that. And obviously we saw Ramsdale today. There were multiple penalties that I felt like Ramsdale should have saved. And also, obviously, anytime you concede a goal where you get caught off of your line and the Sporting guy scores from, what was it, 40, 42 yards, something like that, that's unacceptable. It can't happen. Ultimately, that's why Arsenal have went home today. So I'm not going to be that guy to say Ramsdale needs to get out of the club, needs to be sold. But I do think if I'm Arsenal in the long term, I don't know if Ramsdale is your guy. And I think potentially looking at a true number one goalkeeper replacing Ramsdale might be an option for Arsenal that they need to look into, because this is ultimately why they went out of this competition right now. They played good enough to win. Sporting also played good enough to win, but so did Arsenal. Both teams played good enough to win. And the difference, in my opinion, was Ramsdale. He wasn't able to save a penalty where I felt like he should have saved a couple. And ultimately, you get caught off your line by 40 yards. That can't happen. It's unacceptable. It can't happen. So if I'm Arteta and the board, I need to look at a new goalkeeper. I think that's what Arsenal should be looking at. But like I say, the defense was solid. Of course, even when they had to bring in Ben White, even when they had to sub off Saliba, they were still fine. You know what I mean? This was Tomiyasu and Saliba was out, and ultimately it took a 40-yard banger where Ramsdale was off his line for Sporting to score. And ultimately, they were still solid. Besides that, they didn't really give up that many clear chances. I mean, Sporting definitely had some chances to score, but for a defense that was, having injuries and things like that, I felt like they played well. The midfield was solid. Jorginho, he had an unbelievable ball for the first goal for Arsenal, so that's still looking like a good signing. I'm not worried about Arsenal. Jesus is back. It's one of those things. He had to be subbed off at the 46th minute. So obviously he's still getting back into form, but I'm not worried about Arsenal in the long term. I'm really not. I think There's still positives you take from this game. It's not like Sporting smashed them. It's not like you can come away from this saying, I definitively believe that Arsenal are going to fall off the cliff now. The elephant is going to fall from the tree. Arsenal are done. I really don't think that. I'm not going to guarantee Arsenal are going to win the league because I still think it's going to be very, very close. If I had to bet right now, I know I've said Man City have going to. I've said the entire season that Man City are going to find a way, and I'm still going to stick with that prediction. But I don't think it's as definitive as I believed at one point, and I can definitely see a world where Arsenal do win the Premier League because, like I say, I think it comes down to that 3-game stretch of Chelsea, Manchester City, and Newcastle. And ultimately, I do think that they will lose to Man City again. And then I do think they drop points to one of Chelsea or Newcastle. And it might be Chelsea at the moment. I know I might be saying that as a Chelsea fan, but I think Chelsea by then are definitely going to be playing. They're already playing well. I think Chelsea as a club is building up momentum. So that Chelsea Arsenal clash is going to be a classic. It's going to be a very good London derby. I'm excited for it, even though it's a bit far away now. But my overall takeaway, I'm not worried about Arsenal. You shouldn't be either for any Arsenal fans watching this. Like I say, this is a blessing in disguise for Arsenal to be out of the Europa League, not having to worry about it. Being able to rest your players, no fixture congestion, no playing on Thursday nights and then having to play again at the weekend. It's done. You focus on the Premier League. This is what you want to win. And it will be very impressive if they are able to do it. But any Arsenal fans, let me know in the comments down below. What did you think of this match? Are you disappointed with this result? Are you actually kind of happy with this result so that you can focus on the Premier League? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Drop a like on the video. Drop some comments on the video. Subscribe to the channel because we're over 1,000 looking for our next milestone. But without further ado, I'm Zach. I will see you next time for another video. Peace.